Welcome everyone to In the Company of Stewards tonight. For those who are new to these meetings, new to LDS Earth Stewardship, LDS Earth Stewardship is a nonprofit organization that strives to honor the Creator by living and testifying of gospel principles of Earth stewardship. Through educational forums and service opportunities, we hope to help every Latter-day Saint to be a steward of the earth. And tonight, we are excited to welcome and introduce Ellen White, who will be presenting tonight. Ellen currently lives in Alexandria, Virginia, just outside of DC, with her husband and 2-year-old son. Growing up in the Pacific Northwest, she cultivated a deep love for nature and graduated from BYU with a degree in photography and the dream of being a successful landscape photographer. Stay-at-home mom life leaves little for that now, but she's found new ways to show her love for the earth by trying to be a better steward. When she's not thinking about sustainability, she loves reading, cooking, and fangirling over her favorite shows. We will turn the time over now to Ellen.
All right. Hello, everybody. Let me share my screen really quick. All right. So can everybody see that all right? Okay. So I'm excited to be here tonight. So I see Laurel here representing from our Earth East group over here on the East Coast. So I actually gave this presentation last month for our Earth East group. And so I was asked to give it again for you guys. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity to share some more. And I'm glad that I got a little test run in the first time. So we're going to be talking today about how to eat more sustainably. I'm sorry, the kid just woke up, so sorry if you hear him in the background. But we're going to be talking about how to eat more sustainably and specifically how to transition to more of a plant-rich diet and also how to reduce your food waste. Those are two of the best things that you can do right now for the planet, and they're also just a great way to be more mindful and respectful of creation as we're trying to be better earth stewards. So before I start, I can kind of like explain my journey, as you would say, for plant-based eating. So my husband and I have been eating a primarily plant-based or vegan diet for a little over 3 years now. And we originally decided to make the switch because we were inspired by my sister-in-law, actually, who decided to go vegetarian after she watched a documentary on animal agriculture and after she did a study of the Word of Wisdom and prayed and pondered about it for a little bit. And so we were intrigued by that. And so we watched the same documentary and also read the Word of Wisdom and decided that we would try to go vegan for 1 month and see what it was like. And we weren't perfect for that entire month, but by the end of it, we realized that we felt so good and that it hadn't been as difficult as we had anticipated. And so we decided to stick with it. And so here we are 3 years later. So I will also make a disclaimer and say that we're not perfect, nor do we try to be. Pretty much everything we make in our home is entirely plant-based, and we're pretty strictly vegetarian at this point, but we give ourselves a little bit of leeway when we go out to eat or when we're in social situations. So we don't stress ourselves out by being worried about every single ingredient and the things we eat, and also so that we don't stress other people out and making them feel like that we're like a lot to handle. So that's just the balance that we found works for us. So kind of what I want to talk about tonight is first I'm going to dive into the scriptures. I want to go over a few things that we learn in the Doctrine and Covenants, just so that we can kind of have a foundation for where we stand in LDS doctrine and culture for the way we should be eating, and so that we can start to make this connection between the dominion and the stewardship we have over the earth and the food that we eat and how it gets onto our plates. And then I'm going to talk some statistics so we can understand why this is such a big problem right now for the planet, and why changing the way that we eat and the way that we use our food can make a big difference. And then I'll share some tips that I've learned along the way for how to do this. I'm by no means an expert, but I've got 3 years under my belt and I've learned a lot in that time. So we're going to start with some scriptures, and I'm just going to read through these. I'll share a couple of my own thoughts, but I ask that you ponder the things that I read. Maybe if you want to go back later and look at these verses again, you can. If there's anything that sticks out to you or that you would like to share, feel free to put it in the chat, or you can wait at the end for the Q&A. But we'll just get into it. So these first set of scriptures comes from the Word of Wisdom, which probably is no surprise. When we think of the Word of Wisdom, I think we often think first of all the specific things we're told to avoid, but we tend to overlook the direction that we're given and just how to eat for overall health. And I don't think that it's a coincidence that the way that we're instructed to eat is good for our bodies, and it's also good for the planet. So I'm just going to read these verses. And again, verily I say unto you, all wholesome herbs God hath ordained for the constitution, nature, and use of man. Every herb in the season thereof, and every fruit in the season thereof, all these to be used with prudence and thanksgiving. Yea, flesh also of beasts and of the fowls of the air, I the Lord have ordained for the use of man with thanksgiving. Nevertheless, they are to be used sparingly. And it is pleasing unto me that they should not be used, only in times of winter or of cold or famine. All grain is ordained for the use of man and of beasts, to be the staff of life, not only for man, but for the beasts of the field and the fowls of heaven, and all wild animals that run or creep on the earth. And these hath God made for the use of man, only in times of famine and excess of hunger. So I find it interesting that this tells us to eat lots of plant foods and in season. And I also think that it's pretty clear in telling us that we should be eating meat sparingly or not at all, unless, of course, we are struggling with hunger or food insecurity in any way. I think that there's unfortunately are still a lot of people in this world who are dealing with those issues, but I would say that probably most of us live within a short drive or walk away from a grocery store that has an abundance of food from all over the world. And so if you think about that, do we really need to be eating meat when we have access to so many other good nutritious foods? And the Lord tells us that it pleases him that we try to limit eating meat if we don't need it. So next, just some more scriptures in Doctrine and Covenants that kind of echo the same thoughts. For behold, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the air, and that which cometh of the earth, is ordained for the use of man for food and for raiment, that he might have an abundance. But it is not given that one man should possess that which is above another, wherefore the world lieth in sin. And woe be unto man that sheddeth blood, or that wasteth flesh, and hath no need. And then, yea, all things which come of the earth in the season thereof are made for the benefit and the use of man, both to please the eye and to gladden the heart. Yea, for food and for raiment, for taste and for smell, to strengthen the body and to enliven the soul. And it pleaseth God that he hath given all these things unto man, for unto this end were they made to be used with judgment, not to excess, neither by extortion. So I feel like we've been told in each of these verses that the things that are on this earth and the animals on this earth were given for us to use, but that we should not be wasting them and we should not be using them to excess or by extortion. And I think that no doubt at this point we have reached the point of excess. And I think just the simple existence of factory farms and things like that are a perfect example of this. We have been given dominion and stewardship over this earth, but that does not give us permission to do whatever we want with it. So lastly, this is a quote that I found from an essay, which I just discovered recently. And if you have not read it, I would highly suggest you look it up. It's called Subduing the Earth, Man's Dominion. And it was written by Hugh Nibley in the 80s. And it kind of talks about what it exactly means that Adam was given dominion over the earth. And so this is just a section from the beginning of it that I found really interesting. The ancients taught that Adam's dominion was nothing less than the priesthood, the power to act for God and in his place. The idea is that God, while retaining his unshakable throne in the heavens, extended his glory to a new world below in the work of the creation. Then, as the culmination of that work, he created man to be in charge of all the things he had created, with the understanding that from this time forth, man must work to improve the earth and preserve and take care of all that is in it, exactly as God had done before. And I really love this, especially because it points out that the power we've been given over this earth is the power of the priesthood, which is something that I had never heard or considered before. And so with that in mind, I wanted to just read these verses from Doctrine and Covenants that tell us how we should be righteously using the priesthood. It says that the rights of the priesthood are inseparably connected with the powers of heaven, and that the powers of heaven cannot be controlled nor handled only upon the principles of righteousness. that they may be conferred upon us, it is true. But when we undertake to cover our sins or to gratify our pride, our vain ambition, or to exercise control or dominion or compulsion upon the souls of the children of men, and I would say maybe in this context, we could extend that to all living things on the earth, in any degree of unrighteousness, behold, the heavens withdraw themselves, the Spirit of the Lord is grieved, and when it is withdrawn, amen to the priesthood or the authority of that man. We have learned by sad experience that it is the nature and disposition of almost all men, as soon as they get a little authority, as they suppose, they will immediately begin to exercise unrighteous dominion. So yeah, just ponder on that, if you will, how maybe we just as a people or maybe individually might be exercising a little bit of unrighteous dominion on the earth and its resources when it comes to the food that we eat. So next, let's talk about why this is important right now. When we talk about food and the environment, the number one thing that we need to discuss is animal agriculture. And so here's just a few statistics to set the stage. So animal agriculture is responsible for 18% of greenhouse gas emissions. And from what I've read, that seems to be a pretty conservative estimate. More comprehensive assessments that take into account like everything involved in animal agriculture, including transportation and such, will put that number closer to about 50%. And just for reference, all transportation exhaust is only responsible for 13%. So it's quite a lot. Animal agriculture is also the leading cause of deforestation, water pollution, species extinction, ocean dead zones, and habitat destruction, which are all obviously big issues. Deforestation, for one, because trees and forests act as carbon sinks, which means that they absorb a lot of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Also, I'm sure that you're aware that the majority of the Amazon rainforest has already been destroyed, and that's mostly to create pastures and feed crops for cattle. And then obviously this deforestation can lead to species extinction and habitat destruction. And then lastly, it's gross, but the improper disposal of animal waste has been polluting and poisoning the communities that surround factory farms especially, and that waste eventually makes its way to the ocean, and that's what's been causing lots of ocean dead zones. An estimated 77 billion land animals are killed each year for food. And that's a number that I personally find to be really staggering, especially since we've been told, as we read in the Word of Wisdom, that we should not be using animals unless we absolutely need them. I think we have to remember that animals are God's creations too, and just as we don't want to be cutting down too many trees, we should not be killing too many of God's animals. And I think that number is a little bit crazy, and I wouldn't be surprised if Heavenly Father's a little bit sad about that. And then finally, the UN Special Report on Climate Change, which they published in August of 2019, officially recommended reducing our meat consumption. And this graph over here uses data from that report and shows the greenhouse gas mitigation potential for different types of diets. And all the way at the top, the diet with the most potential is a no animal source food diet. But I also want to point out that right underneath that is meat or seafood once a month and limited meat and dairy. And so what I'm talking about is not like an all or nothing approach. Any little step that you can take to reduce your consumption of animal products can make a big difference, as you can see here. So next I want to talk about food waste a little bit. So when it comes to food waste, food can be wasted in a variety of ways. And in lower income economies, infrastructure usually plays a larger role in food spoiling earlier in the supply chain, whether that be from lack of refrigeration, poor equipment, poor roads. But when it comes to higher income economies like ours in the US, most of the waste occurs at retail and consumer levels, which means that grocery stores are rejecting food because it doesn't meet their high standards, it doesn't look pretty, or just our personal inefficiencies in our kitchen are causing us to throw away a lot of food that goes bad before we can eat it. Which means that in wealthy countries like ours, we can actually have a big impact on how much food is wasted by just trying to be a little bit more mindful about our consumption and the things that we buy and eat. And so these are just a few statistics on food waste to consider. Food waste accounts for 6 to 8% of total greenhouse gas emissions. The average US consumer wastes 238 pounds of food each year. And if you think about that, that's not even just like a waste of food, that's also just a waste of money for us. And then only 5% of food is composted in the US, making wasted food the single largest component of municipal solid waste, which is a big problem because when food and organic matter make it to the landfill, when they decompose, they produce methane, which is much more harmful than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. So kind of in relation to this, I'm sure that a lot of you are familiar with Sharon Eubanks' talk that she gave in 2019 at Fall Forum for LDS Earth Stewardship, but she asked the question in her talk, when we waste what others desperately need, what are the ramifications to our physical hearts and our unity? This is a difficult question for people who live in what we call first world countries because it's almost impossible not to waste things. Yet our Lord and God as the creator wastes nothing. His system has no waste. When we waste what others desperately need, what does that do to the fabric that stretches between us as human beings? So you can just consider that. I think that considering how much food we waste and how many people in this world are still going hungry, there's definitely a lot of things that we can do better. And also taking advantage of the natural systems that we have that God has created using compost and things like that to return the food that we don't eat back to the earth to be used to grow more food. Just makes sense. So if you're not familiar with Project Drawdown, it is basically a lot of really smart people got together and came up with a plan on how to reverse global warming. And in their book, they outline 100 viable solutions for this plan, ranging from renewable energy to better education and various things. And so they ranked their 100 solutions based on how efficient they could be in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And out of 100, a plant-rich diet made number 4, and reducing food waste was number 3, which I think is pretty amazing. And so I just wanted to read a couple quotes from that book about plant-rich diets. With billions of people dining multiple times a day, imagine how many opportunities exist to turn the tables. It is possible to eat well in terms of both nutrition and pleasure while eating lower on the food chain and thereby lowering emissions. As Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh has said, making the transition to a plant-based diet may well be the most effective way an individual can stop climate change. Recent research suggests he is right. Few climate solutions of this magnitude lie in the hands of individuals or are as close as the dinner plate. And I personally find this really hopeful. I think it's really important for us to make sure that we're aligning our values with our actions. And I think individual action is really important for us to show that we care about the earth. But if we're really being honest with ourselves, there's few things that we can just do as individuals that are going to make a big impact in the climate crisis right now. But changing the way that you eat actually does make a huge impact. And so I think that's really amazing that that's something we have so much control over and that we can change. So before we move on, just to lighten it up a little bit, here's just a few of my favorite memes about plant-based eating. So first, when people say they have never tried vegan food, bread is vegan and it's delicious. When you start eating fruits and veggies and need to get used to fiber, I can tell you that this is true, so watch out for that. And then also my personal favorite, the hardest part about being vegan is having to wake up at 5 a.m. to milk the almonds. So just thought I'd share that. All right, so moving on. And then also before we move on to my personal tips, I just want to say, in case you're worried, that a plant-based diet is completely healthy, specifically when we're talking about whole foods plant-based diets, which means that you're eating an abundance of fruits, vegetables, tubers like potatoes and carrots, whole grains, and legumes like beans and lentils. The science has been really clear on this for a long time, but it just isn't talked about that much, probably because it's very disruptive to the way that we're usually taught to eat. But a whole foods plant-based diet can control, reduce, and even reverse many chronic diseases and has been shown to reduce the risk of type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and certain types of cancer. And speaking personally, we feel a lot better eating this way. I notice that I often don't feel sick after I eat a meal, which I realize, like in hindsight, I often felt sick after eating a meal that was heavy in animal products. And also, More personally, our son, who just turned 2, was actually diagnosed with diabetes several months ago. And so thankfully he was already eating a plant-based diet, but as we've done some research, we've tried to be more conscientious in the last couple of months of making sure that he's eating primarily whole foods. And we have noticed a difference, that it's easier to control his blood sugar, and that his insulin sensitivity increases. So I would say, especially if you or a loved one is dealing with a chronic disease, I would look into whole foods, plant-based eating, and it can potentially help you a lot. And then also many also report increased energy, reduced inflammation, and better weight control on a diet like this. So now that we've talked about those things, where to begin? So the first thing that I would say is to just do whatever is appropriate for your lifestyle and your circumstances. I think we have to acknowledge that it is a privilege to be picky about the things that we eat, and there are a lot of people who don't have access to fresh foods or the budget to afford them. And so I would just say that any small step in the right direction is great. And so just be patient with yourself, start small, and don't stress about it too much if it's a difficult adjustment for you. Also, like I said before, this does not need to be an all or nothing approach. If you really, really love cheese and don't think you could ever stop eating it, you don't have to. It's okay. You can keep eating the things that you love and maybe give up the things that would be a little bit easier for you. I would also say to have a clear why, which means just whether it's any of the things that I've talked about or another reason entirely, just have a clear motivation for why you'd like to change up the way that you eat. And it helps me to remind myself of my why often, which means I like to watch documentaries and to read books on plant-based eating because I'm interested in staying informed on this topic, but then it also has the side effect of helping to remotivate me and reminding me why I choose to do this. I would say to have fun with it and make it a joyful experience. If you focus all on the negatives and all the things that you can't eat or shouldn't eat, then it's going to be really a chore. But we eat much more diverse and interesting foods now than we ever did before we went plant-based. And so I think it's just a really fun experience to learn more about new foods and new flavors. I would also say to learn how to cook and use vegetables and grains and legumes and those things to make them the stars of the show, instead of relying super heavily on like plant-based meat alternatives and things like that when you start out. Those are getting better and better all the time. And if you have not tried an Impossible Burger yet, I would highly recommend that you look them up and try them because they're amazing. And so those options are available for when the cravings hit, and they're definitely a more sustainable option, but they still are highly processed and they're often a little bit expensive. And so I would just say just to enjoy learning about whole foods first. I would also start slow and steady. Kind of as I've said before, if you try to go all in too fast and it becomes stressful for you, you're probably going to burn out and not create good habits that you're going to stick with. And so we kind of ended up doing the cold turkey route by deciding to go vegan for a month. And so maybe with your personality that something like that would be helpful for you, just to like get started. But for most people, I would say just go slow. And maybe this means you just start one meal at a time. Maybe you just say, I want to have plant-based breakfast. And then once you feel comfortable with that, you can move on to lunch and dinner or whatever you want to do. Maybe you just replace one food that you like to eat with a plant-based alternative. Plant-based milks like almond milk and things like that are a really easy switch that a lot of people are already doing. Maybe you could just cut out red meat, which alone would make a huge difference. Or you could do things like meatless Mondays or vegan before 6 p.m. Just figure out something that would work for you to get started. Find a few recipes that you really love and that are easy to make and that your family enjoys eating, and just start incorporating them into your repertoire regularly. I would also say that, because this came up the last time I gave this presentation, that you also just kind of have to recognize that, especially if you are looking to stick to more of a whole foods plant-based diet, it just does require more time in the kitchen. It requires more time to prep and prepare vegetables and things like that. And there for sure are quick, easy meals out there, and I've been relying on those more and more. I often just like find meals that I can just throw all together in one pot. I use the crock pot, the Instant Pot, or you could, if you're really short on time and just like find that you don't have a lot of time to prepare food, maybe you could rely on things like meal prepping to help you. But also just And if you also don't like cooking, you can maybe just look for the easy things, but it just does take a little bit more time. So you have to be aware of that. I would also say to be patient with others. So as I said, we give ourselves a little bit of leeway in social situations, mostly because I don't have a ton of self-control. And if somebody's going to give me a cookie, like I'm going to eat the cookie. I don't really care whether it's vegan or not. But it also has the side effect of like helping people not feel like we're uptight or that we're like judging them or anything. And I feel like we've been really lucky in that some people may not totally understand why we eat this way, but everybody we've encountered has been really lovely and considerate of us and really accommodating to our needs. And so I feel like as plant-based eating and as vegetarianism and things are becoming more popular, as people are starting to understand that it's important for the environment, that people understand and are more accepting than you probably think they would be. We don't expect other people to remember that we're vegan, but people often do and are really nice and will like prepare us special things, you know, if we're coming over. But if we know that we're going to be in a social situation, like we're going to a party or a church activity, if you want something to eat, you often just need to say something or just bring food yourself. And so we often bring our own dishes and then share with friends, and like 99% of the time, people love the things that we make and it's not that big of a deal. And then we ensure that we have something to eat. So I'd also say that when it comes to talking to others about this, we just kind of wait for people to approach us. You don't want to give them like a whole information dump exactly like I'm doing right now if they're not interested, because then they'll probably just feel a little bit threatened and like you're judging them, which you're absolutely not trying to do. And then lastly, well, a couple more things. So I would say you could also just try to treat meat as a delicacy or something that's reserved for special occasions in an effort to eat it more sparingly. And one way that you can maybe do this is committing to buy your animal products from small local farms. That way you can ensure that the animals are being treated humanely if that's something that matters to you. And also then it can feel a little bit more special and you're helping to support a local business. And then lastly, I would say to educate yourself on the science and nutrition behind plant-based eating, just to make sure that you're being healthy as you transition and getting all the vitamins and things that you need. And also it can help you overcome biases that you may have about food, like carbs are bad or that you need a ton of protein every day, which you don't. So that can be really helpful. So just to get your mouth watering and also just to kind of see what this actually looks like. These are just some pictures that I did not take myself, but of recipes that we make on a regular basis. So you can kind of see where we're at. So just as general examples, we often make curries, which are really easy. It's really easy to swap out meat for your lentils or chickpeas. We make lots of pasta, stir fries. We like to have soups, tacos, whatever. We also really like to make Buddha bowls, which is kind of like a popular Pinterest thing, but it's basically just any combination you want of a leafy green, a grain, some vegetables, and a protein, and just throw it all together in a bowl. So we'll often do just like some leafy greens, like some lettuce or spinach, maybe some quinoa. We've been really into bulgur recently. If you have not tried it, it's delicious. And then I'll just roast up whatever veggies we have on hand, some chickpeas, and then I often just like water down some hummus to make a dressing, and then boom, meal. So these are just, so I'll go over these recipes, these pictures that I have up here of things that we make. So at the top, there's a really good chili, a vegetarian chili that we do in a crock pot with lentils and beans. That's just really hearty and filling. We also really like to make sweet and sour chickpeas, which is just a stir fry with vegetables and chickpeas and a sweet and sour sauce. And then this recipe is something that we make often for friends, and it's been a hit everywhere. And it's a chickpea salad sandwich. And so it's basically just a take on a chicken salad, but instead of chicken, you use mashed chickpeas. And then we use vegan mayonnaise, and it's delicious. Pasta, we eat a lot of pasta, and we often, kind of to go back to how it takes a little bit more time to cook sometimes, we find ourselves often making things that you maybe would just normally grab on the shelf in the pantry from scratch, like pasta sauces, just because there aren't, unless you're going for like a simple tomato sauce or something, there aren't a ton of vegan options available as of yet. And so it's really easy to make pasta sauces with like cashews as the base. When you blend up cashews, they're really creamy and it can kind of like imitate an Alfredo or creamy type of sauce. But this pasta right here is a ratatouille pasta. So just like with tomato sauce and then your typical ratatouille ingredients like zucchini and eggplant and tomato. Down at the bottom, we have an incredible vegan nacho cheese recipe that we make regularly. And it's actually a base of carrots and potatoes, weirdly enough. But it's delicious, and all of our non-vegan friends who have tried it really love it. A really good example of a Buddha bowl that we make often is a Thai Buddha bowl. It has a base of coconut rice, and then you add some chopped cabbage, tomatoes, mango, carrots, and then with some tofu on the top and like a spicy peanut sauce. I make vegan pancakes, which are really simple, at least a couple times a week. We've also found a really good chocolate chip cookie recipe. And then tacos are really easy. You can make tacos out of anything. We often do lentils, beans, cauliflower is kind of a new favorite. But those are just a couple ideas to like help you understand what this actually looks like. So then I also want to point out, because it always comes up, the protein question. So that's just a misconception that I had, and I think most of us have, that it's impossible to get enough protein on a plant-based diet. And I actually read that adults eating like a 2,000 calorie diet, we only need about 50 grams of protein a day. And especially in the United States, we regularly eat way more than that. So as you can see, it would be really easy to meet that threshold with plant protein, and it also has the benefit of being healthier for you. So now I just want to talk about some other ideas on how to just eat more sustainably and also how to reduce your food waste. So the first thing I would say is you can try to shop locally, whether that be at a farmer's market or at our grocery stores here. They sometimes sell and advertise local foods, so you could choose to pick those things first. Or you could sign up for a CSA, which is something that I've kind of done a version of in the past, but it stands for Community Supported Agriculture. And essentially what it is you can find a farm that's close by. And if they're doing a CSA program, you essentially like buy a share of the harvest for that year. And so you'll pay upfront for a season, and you'll get fresh produce delivered from that farm every week or so. And so that's a great option to support your local farmers and to get food locally. And the benefit of local food is that it hasn't traveled as far to get to you. And it's also probably most likely seasonal, because it is really costly to grow food out of season, like having to heat greenhouses and stuff to grow like summer crops in the winter. You can also grow your own food, which is another obvious option. I actually just got a plot at our community gardens close to our apartment. And so I have never gardened before in my life, but I'm really excited to grow some vegetables for the first time. And so that's an option if you don't have a yard. But if you do have a yard or a balcony, consider maybe starting to grow a little bit of your own food. And as we learned from Mary Kay in a previous talk about native plants, it's also just a better use of your yard space. So as far as reducing your food waste, here are just some tips that I found and that I've tried and really liked. So try to compost your food scraps, which is the first obvious answer. If you're not interested in doing it yourself, or you don't have the space to do it, maybe look and see if your city has a composting program. I know that here in Alexandria, we are allowed to take our compost to any farmer's market on the weekends and drop it off, and the city takes care of it, which is really nice. We also have some organic grocery stores for those of us in Virginia and Maryland called Mom's Organic grocery stores, and they have compost dumpsters in the back of their stores that you can drop your stuff off at, and they will take care of it. I think there's also paid services out there where you can have people come and pick up your compost if you want to, but there's a lot of options if you have a yard or a little bit of space. There's those cool composters, those tumblers that you like spin, which I think would be so fun. Or you can get into worm composting if you're feeling adventurous. But it can be really fun, and we've noticed that just our waste and the things that go into our trash has reduced drastically since we've started composting. You can meal plan and make grocery lists so that when you go to the store, you make sure you only buy the things that you need. And then another big thing is to learn how to properly store your produce so that it can last longer. I think that most of the food waste in our country at the consumer level is produce, which makes sense because it often spoils before we have the chance to eat it, especially things like leafy greens and things that are kind of fragile. So some of our favorite tips that I do is as I chop up carrots and celery, just like in big chunks, and I store them in jars covered in water in the fridge. And you can just change the water out every few days and they stay crisp forever. And that's really great. You can store your leafy greens in a damp towel, or I'll often, if I buy like a head of lettuce, I'll just like chop it up right away and put it in a bowl, and then it lasts much longer. So just kind of look it up, see what fruits and vegetables are good to store together or separate, and that can go a long way for helping you to use up the food that you buy. You can try to shop your pantry before you go grocery shopping, just to make sure that you're using the food that you already have, and so that things don't get lost in the back of the cupboard or the refrigerator. Before you compost, or instead of composting, you can maybe find creative ways to use your food scraps. I've heard that you can make homemade vegetable broth, or you can make natural dyes, and I haven't tried either of those things, but I would love to in the future. Also, another obvious one is use your freezer to help you if things are going to go bad, or if you just want to meal prep and make a large quantity of food. And then also get active in your community. You can use food sharing apps, or you can sign up and get a part of your local Buy Nothing group on Facebook, which I've just started to get involved with. If you haven't heard of the Buy Nothing project yet, you can go to their website, and it's like hyper local groups, and the idea is that there's no exchange of money and people just freely give and ask for things that they need. And so I've started to get involved with my Facebook Buy Nothing group just for my small neighborhood. It's just like a few mile radius, and it's really fun to see how generous people are, and then also just be able to like make sure that when you're getting rid of your stuff that it has a home. And then also share your food with family and friends. So lastly, I just want to talk about a few resources if you're interested in learning more about plant-based eating. So the number one thing I would recommend is check out Forks Over Knives if you're interested in whole foods, plant-based diets. They have an excellent documentary, and then they also have a website and several cookbooks, and there's hundreds of recipes for free on their website, and they have a lot of great education on how to eat a whole foods, plant-based diet. A few documentaries that we've watched that we've really loved is Cowspiracy, which talks about the environmental impact of animal agriculture, and I believe that is on Netflix. Another really excellent documentary that just came out a couple of years ago is called Eating Animals, and I believe it's on Hulu, and we watched it recently and we're really impressed. It was kind of just about farmers in the United States and the struggles they're facing as they try to raise their animals humanely and keep things environmentally friendly. And then the last one, which you might have heard of, that came out a couple years ago as well, is called The Game Changers, and that's about elite athletes who eat plant-based diets, and that one's really fun and interesting. A book that I would recommend is The China Study, which I actually have not read yet, but I'm planning on it, and my husband has read some of it. But it's the most, as it says on the front, it's the most comprehensive study of nutrition ever conducted, and I've heard that it's really excellent. And these scientists and doctors who conducted the study over a really long period of time concluded that a whole foods plant-based diet is the best way to eat for overall health and longevity. And then I gotta give a shout out to Pinterest. It's where I find like pretty much all of my recipes. So you don't have to be on Pinterest, but it can be helpful to just kind of like to explore a little bit. And then a couple of blogs that we really like that have good recipes. The Minimalist Baker is great, especially if you're looking for easy and quick things. And then also Hot for Food. She has a YouTube channel and a blog, and if you are looking for like some good, indulgent, vegan comfort food, she's the one to go to. We use her nacho cheese recipe, and she's got some really amazing stuff. So all these resources, if you want a list of them and also links to the recipes I talked about, they got posted on a blog post on eartheast.org, which is the website for the East chapter of LDS Earth Stewardship. And then I think there's also a link to that blog post on just the regular LDS Earth Stewardship website. But I hope that was informative and inspiring. And I guess I'll just say to close that I guess I can bear my testimony on this, but I know that changing the way we eat has had a big impact on just how close I feel to Heavenly Father and how I feel on being a better Earth steward. And I know that it's important to be more mindful about our choices and just to try to follow the Lord's counsel more in the word of wisdom and and just try to take better care of the earth. And as I said before, I don't think it's a coincidence that the things that are best for our bodies are also best for the planet. And so I'll just end with that. Say that in the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen. Thank you so, so much, Ellen.